I'll go ahead and I'll post the video. It'll probably be sometime tomorrow. Well, it may be able to be tonight. We'll have to see how it works out. But it's a bit of time to convert it, and I'll probably post it as a YouTube link. And hopefully you get some pretty good audio on that. I know that sometimes we're not real satisfied with the product that comes through in YouTube, but we'll try to do the best we can. Looks like we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. We got about 4 people missing. Something like that. That's a lot. So anyway, so we're going to get started. First thing I wanted to do is just to sort of review where we are in the class right now. Obviously a 7-week class, as you are all now very well familiar. It moves kind of quickly. So the quiz 1 discussion is posted, and I've made that available until the 6th. And so, and after that, you can, unless there's anybody who needs to do a makeup of that, you can go in and see how well you did. You can take it multiple times again and again and again. And some people do that. I think I told the class last time I had a student in one semester who took it like 47 times. We take quiz over and 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 over again. And you can do it. I mean, the system will not lock you. It'll just let you do it until it expires. So you're free to do that. I posted all the quizzes. Go ahead. It'll take your highest score. It'll just default to the highest score. So if you got 5. Yeah, right. It'll take your highest score. Yeah. So you would sort of thought that she would have by random chance got a 25 out of 25. Just I take it 40 times. Now, what I did not do is I didn't post the exams yet. And what I need to find out is, well, first, and I'd forgotten it. I had told the class I was going to look into it, but I want to see whether or not we are going to be okay with putting that in Brightspace. Because I know that we've been doing it for the last 3 years or so, for it as a default scheme because of the COVID lockdown and all that. But this was intended to be a hybrid section, part online, part in class. Exams are usually done in class. So we have a meeting in the morning. I'll run that by the powers that be and see if that's a problem. I don't have a problem with it. I just want to make sure I'm not in some glaring violation of what our protocol is for that. So I'll let you know. But I didn't post those yet anyway, notwithstanding my forgetting about that, because I don't know what we're going to cover for the first exam. I don't know how far we're going to get, is what I'm saying. So I want to make sure that I don't put something on the exam, make it available, and then, hey, you didn't talk about this. And so I want to make sure it's there. And by the way, these 2 exams in week 4 and week 7, those are not comprehensive. So, but having said that, though, I mean, when we say not comprehensive, well, it's sort of true and sort of not true, because some of the material does build on itself. And so, that's something to consider as far as that goes. Even though it's not technically comprehensive, you still will need to know some of the things that came before that. So, okay. All right. So last time we were talking, now there aren't any questions about anything? About discussions. And so I know last time we had this discussion in class, and I told the class, and I was mostly indifferent as to when you posted your original reply. I know that the program was designed so that you would post a lot of stuff and get stuff done by Wednesday for a Thursday class. But I said I was mostly indifferent to that. And then if you wanted to make your initial reply by the Friday of every week, that's fine. Now, I haven't reviewed last week's discussions yet, but I'm probably not going to be real stringent on that. We had a lot of people missing, and it's the first week. And sometimes instructors do things a little bit differently. And I sort of threw it out there that maybe we want to do this a little bit differently on discussions. If you want to post your initial reply to the actual discussion at hand by Wednesday, by all means, feel free to do it. But I think probably by Friday is more helpful to all of you. Does that sound right to you? And then post at least 2 other posts, at least 1 of the day. And you can make those on Monday if you want, just replying to other people and all that. But just make it substantive, make it related to the content at hand. I think one of the things that I said, I've got something in the discussion guidelines link in the discussions part of Brightspace, that one of the areas where people get off track unknowingly, I think a lot of times is to start to reply to somebody and it gets just conversational, it gets off on, I have a Chevy truck too. Oh, what a coincidence. And, I did, and suddenly you're 3 or 4 sentences in, and oh, what are we talking about? Oh, supply and demand. I mean, you get the idea. So just to try to make sure you don't get overly conversational. So my Friday initial post, and one of the day during the course week, make a couple of other. It does not have to be a lot. I mean, I think that my definition of a paragraph was 3 quality sentences, and I'm not looking at punctuation and grammar and spelling. It's not, I wouldn't lose any sleep over that, or I definitely wouldn't get overly fixated on sources and references. You shouldn't really have to cite any references. I mean, or quote anybody. I know sometimes people think it's a great idea to quote 2 or 3 sentences. You don't have to do that. That's probably something you don't want to do, to be honest with you, because you might run into trouble just quoting somebody and they're not really citing it correctly. Don't even get yourself down that path, because it's just not necessary. So just on your own words, it's very informal, and then kind of go from there. And then the two discussion days requirement kind of harkens back to this idea of when online education started, and it was sort of a replacement for physical classroom meetings, which typically in college settings happens twice a week. Obviously, once a week and double the time. So that's where that logic comes from. Okay. All right. So questions for me about did you guys take the quiz yet? And was it
tried once?
Tried once. Okay. And your thoughts were?
Yeah, well, I mean, for not quite being caught up where I need to be, I did pretty well on it.
Okay.
Kind of took it just to see what was on it, how much I could answer.
Okay. Okay, we still got.
I'm gonna have to do it.
Okay.
Me too.
Okay. All right. So I think what we're going to do is we'll pick up. This is from the slide package form from last week, and I posted yesterday the one for this week. I didn't realize when I had set this class up at the beginning of the week, but I did not post the PowerPoints for this week, and I don't think I did that until like last night. So those will be available, and I'll get onto that for sure. But I just want to finish up where we started. This is just some very introductory content, very introductory material, where we're talking about who's who, who's what, who does what, and who, what, when, where, why. In other words, economics, and that's really what this initial. Oh, yeah, the last time did that. I think there's no like halfway. I think isn't there like you hit this once.
There was like there's a brighter. Yeah, there's a
brighter. I guess that's all you get. Well, okay, most classes they shut down some of the lines. I guess that's as good as it's going to get. And so all we're doing is going over some of these introductory bits that are going to come up a bit later. And there's a reason why we're doing this. It's because these terms and these identifications are going to come up throughout the course. And so it's good just to sort of get these in your inventory of knowledge right now. So I want to talk about goods and services. Now, we talked last time, remember in the circular flow model we did, we said that we had these red arrows that were the physical flow, or the quote unquote real economy of goods going one direction from firms to households and labor from households to firms. And yet we said that the term goods was sort of a euphemism for goods and services. However, I think it's important that we talk about the fact that goods and services are a little bit different, and how are they different? And let's talk about how they're different. And once we're done with this, we'll say, okay, but we're going to say that all goods and services, we're going to sort of use the shorthand of the term goods as a euphemism for all goods and services, just like we did in the circular flow model. So why are we doing this? Because if you think about what goods are, we define this as heavy physical substance, can be inventoried, and you can put them on a shelf, put them on a truck, move them, shoplift them, burn them up in a fire, all these kinds of things. And where there's a lag time between production and consumption. You buy some Pop-Tarts today, and they were probably made, I don't know, 2 weeks ago in some other part of the country. They were inventoried somewhere, put on a truck, shipped, put in a warehouse, shipped to Walmart or wherever. And so there's a lag time between the time they were produced and the time they were consumed. I don't know, 2 weeks, maybe a long time for Pop-Tarts. I have no idea, but, or maybe not. I think I've had Pop-Tarts in my cupboard that have been there for a while. So that you can get the idea of a physical substance. And I think that probably when we talk about this goods flow, at one time, probably most goods were of a physical nature in our economy, whether they were, used by businesses or used by households, whatever, or even bought by government, they were of physical nature. But services are also important to talk about, and that is they have little or no physical substance. So if you go to the doctor and you walk out, there's nothing that you're not carrying anything. There's no sack that you're carrying. There's no box. You've gone there to get a service done. There's really no physical evidence that you've been to the doctor, but you've gone there to get a service rendered. Or if you even, and whatever substance there may be physical is incidental. Like you go to get your taxes done, you pay your accountant $300 or whatever, and you walk out with pieces of paper. Well, you didn't pay $300 for pieces of paper, obviously. You went there to get your taxes done, and that's just the evidence of that. So the substance is irrelevant for the most part. And they can't easily be inventoried. It's not really possible to say, to your dentist, well, go ahead and get started on that filling, and I'll be there next week to pick it up, right? It just doesn't work that way. They tend to be produced and consumed at the same time. There are some goods, you could say that maybe some research products can be inventory, but not really. I mean, even in the accounting world, we have a lot of difficulty putting those on the books as inventory and whatnot. So here's the thing, why are we talking about these? Well, I think that there are a couple of ways to look at services. And one is there is an old school view of services, I think, that I think is very old school. And that was the idea, this is the major league, these are the Yankees, this is the minor league, this is the isotopes kind of thing. And somehow producing real stuff. And you hear people say, we no longer make stuff in America anymore, right? Which, by the way, is wrong anyway, but we hear that all the time. And I grew up in the upper Midwest, which is big manufacturing territory. And it is true, we have moved a lot of manufacturing stuff out of the country for all kinds of reasons, cost mostly. But that's really not true. By the way, it's almost irrelevant because is a dollar of output of a physical good, like a transmission for a car, is it equivalent economically to the same dollar amount of something you might pay a doctor, for instance? If it's $2,000 for transmission, and $2,000 of surgeon services, is it the same economic effect, really? Is it a different economic effect? I mean, they go different places, I get that, but is a dollar, whether it's a physical good or whether it's a service?
Well, if we say value is whatever people think or something. I would use the example, buying a new transmission versus repairing a transmission.
Okay, well, let's just say it's a new transmission, right? Let's just say it's new. Well, either way, I mean, actually it's either way. Whether it's $2,000 to buy a new transmission or $2,000 to repair one, which would be a lot. I mean, they're probably not equivalent dollar figures, but the point is a dollar amount of output the same as a dollar of goods, physical goods, the same as a dollar amount of output of services. And the idea is, yes, they're absolutely equivalent. It makes no difference whatsoever. Now, obviously, there may be more people involved in the supply chain for physical goods. That is true. That's one of the reasons why a lot of manufacturers have left the US, because of all the complexities of supply chain and cost and regulation and red tape and all these other, and taxes, all these things that a lot of manufacturers avoid by going to India and China and all that. So I get that. But still, nonetheless, the output of goods is the same as the output of services. Plus, I would argue that one is not superior to the other anyway, because they do, number one, they contribute the same to our total output of goods and services. But also, think about this, when it comes to the US's connection to the rest of the world, and we're going to get to this next week a little bit more. If we sell goods to somebody abroad, basically what that is this: we sell them a transmission or whatever, and then they send us euros that we convert to dollars, right? Whether it's a transmission or whether it's financial services or whether it's motion pictures, whatever it is, it's still the same. And by the way, we have got a huge deficit with the rest of the world when it comes to physical goods. It's called the merchandise trade deficit. It's negative. And it's a drag on our economy. Because why? Because every time we buy an imported good, we're hitting the brakes a little bit on the economy. Because we're financing the output and income of some other country, and we're taking away the output and income of an American producer. And I say that not to lay a giant guilt trip down on people. I know that, of course, I grew up in car country where there are people, if you park your Toyota on someone's driveway, they tell you to move, right? That's how extreme it kind of gets in certain quarters. But it is true that every time you buy an imported good, that you do contribute to drag on GDP. By the way, when it comes to where was that Toyota probably made anyway? So it's probably made somewhere in the US. So, a lot of Toyotas and Hondas. Hondas are made in Ohio. BMWs are made in South Carolina. Subarus are made in Indiana. I mean, and so the makers of those vehicles got smart and decided that if we put up trade barriers, that they would avoid those by making goods here. Okay, but we have a huge surplus here. This is a huge plus, because we export to the rest of the world more than what we import from the rest of the world when it comes to services. And so if anything, this is maybe more superior. And we can produce these faster and get paid faster and generate income much faster than producing some of these goods, which may have a very long lag time between production and consumption, and sometimes a very, very long lag time, to the point where sometimes these good, and if like high-tech goods that are produced and very, very quickly have a very short shelf life, and because they're going to be replaced by some other goods. So, and that's one of the problems of physical goods. So we're going to cover that a bit more. Right now, this is the differentiation. Having said all this, we're going to sort of use the term goods just as a euphemism for goods and services. And then one final bit here before and I'm going to jump into the chapter 1 appendix, because I know we were talking a little bit before class about the math expectation. I did want to get to that last week, but sort of ran short on time, and so I'll get to that, but I'll do that here in a second. I did want to talk about types of goods, and this is really sort of the very end of this, this is the end of the beginning of the class, if you like, and that is, we're going to be talking about goods and how goods relate to other goods. And when I say goods, we're talking about goods and services. And so we've set these up as what we would call dichotomous pairs, coupled pairs, one of which are opposite one another. However you want to think about these, North Pole, South Pole, you know, American League, National League, whatever you want to think about it, they're opposites. If you're a good, that's a substitute for another good. If you're not a complement for another good. And then what's more important for a macro course is normal goods and inferior goods. And this will come up quite frequently as we talk about the output of goods and services, and more particularly where we are heading. And we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, the business cycle tonight, hopefully if we don't run out of time. And right now, I think a lot of people believe, and I'm one of them, that we're probably at sort of the top of the business cycle, and that we're probably heading for a recession if we're not already just in the very early stages. I think we're probably not quite there yet because the data aren't very convincing, but we're starting to see a real slowdown in a lot of areas of the economy. We're starting to see a slowdown in hiring. We're seeing a slowdown in wage growth. We're seeing housing has just gotten its legs chopped out from under. Anything connected to real estate has just gotten chopped. And you know, and so we're seeing that mostly because it's being engineered by the government in order to slow the economy down. Okay. So let's talk about these dichotomous pairs. And that sounds like a really wonky academic term, but we talk about these a lot. Substitutes and complements. A substitute good is simply a good that can be relatively easily swapped for another in a purchase decision. And by the way, the thing to know about these are not identical goods. Coke and Pepsi are not substitutes. They're just simply brands. They're just differences in the same brand. And by the way, Coke and Pepsi are pretty much the same good, aren't they? I mean, I know those are fighting words, you know, when you say that, you know, to some. And I remember in Coca-Cola premised its introduction to New Coke on the idea that people really wanted something a little bit sweeter. And so as a result of the cola wars with Pepsi, they thought they'd introduce New Coke. And it turns out that people just hated the idea. And they very quietly, over many years, it took. By the way, New Coke, I don't even think you can buy New Coke anymore. I think it's just gone. And what used to be called Coca-Cola Classic, they just took the Classic off of there very quietly, wanting to put that whole, it's kind of like a weird uncle nobody wants to talk about, right? It's like a chapter they don't want to get to. So Coke and Pepsi are not substitutes, they're simply brands in the same way. By the way, when I was in graduate school, we did I had a microeconomist for a prof who did a study, and we got a little bit of trouble because we had alcohol at campus, but not big trouble, but we had people test Bud Light and Miller Lite in Dixie cups. They couldn't tell which was which. Now, I know, and I'm related to a lot of beer drinkers, and all that. I used to drink beer myself, but I know everybody would say, oh, are you kidding me? I can tell the difference between Coke and Pepsi. Or not Coke, Bud Light and Miller Lite. But guess what? Not really. It was about half and half. They got it right about half the time, and wrong about half the time. And you would think, particularly if you drink a lot of beer, that you are faintly familiar with beer, that you would be able to tell the difference, but you really can't. And nor can people tell the difference between Coke and Pepsi, and it is difficult to do. You know when you have it in your hand, but otherwise you don't. So brands are basically the same good. They're not really substitutes for good. Complements are goods that go along with another good. These are a little bit more complicated in the sense that sometimes they're purchased together because they go together, right? So if you're going to buy hot dogs, you're also probably going to buy hot dog buns. Right, you're probably going to buy. Now, can you buy hot dog buns without buying hot dogs? I mean, would you do that? Probably. I mean, you probably are not going to buy hot dog buns without buying hot dogs. You're probably not going to buy hot dogs without buying hot dog buns, although you may. These are goods that go together. is that you have to have prior in order to use them. So if you buy golf balls, the assumption is you've got a complementary good already, which is golf clubs. Those are complementary goods that go together. There's no point in buying golf balls if you don't have golf clubs, right? So they've got to go together, and they go together. And so why are we even talking about these is because sometimes if you want to track what's going on within markets, you can see what's going on with the good that's either a substitute for that good in question or a complement for the good in question. If you see one thing happening in one area, it's going to have an impact on another area. So, so right now, if you are looking at something like air travel is rising, and people are traveling more, then you're probably also going to see, if you travel somewhere, you're going to play, go somewhere, you're probably also consuming with that what? And they offer on the same website usually a hotel when you get there, right? And maybe a car rental when you get there. Those are complementary goods. They go right along with it, they track along with each other. Okay. So if you want to know what's going on with one market, sometimes it's important to see what's going on in another market. And by the way, there are occasions in which firms producers are completely gobsmacked because of something happening in the market totally unrelated to them. And I remember when I was in banking, we had a big customer that produced, I think they produced buns, the aforementioned buns, I think it was hamburger buns. And there was some kind of scare on ground beef. And of course, once every 18 months there's some kind of scare on something, right? This just happening on ground beef. Eat ground beef, you'll die, right? That's one of those kind of things. It's like an E. coli breakout. And they were saying, wow, we've got all these buns we can't sell because people aren't buying hamburgers. And it was a real problem because, you know, they had nothing to do with E. coli. They were producing bread products, right? But they were impacted by it. So sometimes these markets are interrelated and you're affected as a producer, even though you have nothing to do with that, okay? What's probably more, this pair is more important for what we're doing in macro, and that is normal goods and inferior goods. Normal goods are those goods that for which demand it tracks along with income. As incomes rise, people buy more of these goods. As incomes fall, people buy less of those goods. Hence the name normal, okay? And these are, and most goods, we can say are normal goods. Most goods are normal goods. Most goods, the demand tracks along with income. One thing about this, and I probably should have put this on the slides, all luxury goods are normal goods. All luxury goods are normal goods as our incomes rise. And some luxury goods are those goods in which income has got to rise above a certain area. And then once it does, boom, the floodgates open. People now suddenly are affording those particular goods. Okay, so all luxury goods are normal goods, which is not to say that you know all normal goods are luxuries, because that is not the case. So think about this: your incomes rise. Okay, you graduate from college, you know, you get a job, and now you're making 2.5 times what you were making. So what are you going to probably demand? Because your income has risen, you're going to demand more of what? Well, okay. He's trying to get by. Okay. So yes, luxury. So you're going to maybe buy a nice watch, a nice car, right? What else? You live in a. If you're like me, when I was in college, I lived in a dump, right? So you're probably going to do what? Get a better place, right? Or maybe buy a house. And if you buy a house, you're going to now consume more electricity, right? And you're maybe going to buy more clothes. All these things, yada yada yada. And furniture and stuff and lawn furniture and gas grills and all the stuff that goes to the house. It's never ending. So for those of us who homeowners, it just never ends. And I've got a wife who has a gigantic list of things that you know, she wants to buy. And I'm trying to have her lose the list, you know, because the list is long. So we've only lived there 5 years, and the list is long. So okay, so normal goods are they're all related to income. By the way, they also go in the other direction if incomes fall. So if you retire, and what do retirees a lot of times do, right? And let's assume they're the typical retiree, empty nester kind of, and then what do, right? And a 5-bedroom house, and now what do? They're going to dial it down and get a condo or an apartment or whatever. And they used to buy nice clothes to wear to work, suits and dresses and all that. And now what are they going to? They're going to be wearing sweat clothes, right? Like the typical retiree. When they go off to play shuffleboard at the senior center, right? They're going to look like my mom, right? Yeah, they're going to dial it down, right? They're going to dial down their spending because they don't need to spend as much, and their incomes are falling typically. And that's part of what being retired is. And so normal goods go in that direction. There is a subset of all goods, though, that we would call inferior goods. And I know the term inferior is a little bit problematic. It's not a term I made up. I think that probably at one time, the term inferior was a qualitative judgment on those goods that move inverse to the business cycle and inversely to people's incomes, and therefore was qualitatively, less superior, I guess, whatever you want to say. I don't know if that's really so much the case. I just think they move opposite the business cycle. Now, why are we interested in normal goods and inferior goods, particularly in macro? It's because if you start to see changes in demand for inferior goods, that can signal an inflection point in the economy. And I think we're starting to see that right now. So inferior goods, if people's incomes begin to fall, maybe they're getting fewer hours at work, maybe their wages are getting cut, maybe the benefits costs are rising, maybe the overtime they were getting is now gone away. So their incomes are falling. And so now what are they going to demand more of, not less of than what they were previously? Such as all right. So it's hamburger substitute. And by the way, all inferior goods are substitutes. Okay, always. So here, some ground beef instead of say, as one example, but in all generic goods are inferior goods. All generic goods are inferior. And by the way, who makes the generic goods that sit side by side on the shelf? Who makes those goods? Typically, not always. Who makes the generic products that sit pretty much side by side on the shelf?
Same companies.
It's usually the same companies. And so sometimes they don't even bother to change the address on the label itself. I mean, you see it all the time. Project Gamble is that it'll be the same address, same mailing address. Like Pert Plus, which is the brand name, one of the top selling shampoos in the world. And then next to it, there's an equally green bottle that may have half as much quantity, but half the price. And it's probably made by Procter & Gamble, the very same people who make that. And the question is, why would they do that? Why would they cut their own throat by offering the generics? Why would they do that?
Because they sell more when the price of their other product is down. They're still selling.
And they can't wave a wand over the demand side and say, I mean, there's always going to be demand for generics because there are some people who don't care about brand at all. There are people who don't care about brand. Now, most of us, I have nobody in my household who doesn't care about brand, but there are people who don't care much about brand, right? And they will buy the generic almost always, every time, right? And are there some goods that you probably are maybe even better off buying the no name, right? So things like trash bags. Well, yeah, Kirkland's, that's private label. But things like trash bags and aluminum foil. I mean, I always buy the cheapest I possibly can. It is what it is. I mean, aluminum foil is going to, I'm going to use it. It's going to go on, that sort of thing. But that would be an inferior good. And so if we're at an inflection point in the business cycle, which I think we are right now, I think you're going to see demand for a lot of inferior goods go up. And it's not necessarily qualitative judgment. I know that sometimes people, when we start naming goods, they say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? But in fact, they do signal a downturn in the business cycle when demand picks up. If you go back to the last recession, and I'm not talking about the very brief two-month mini recession, which as a result of COVID, but the actual full-blown recession that went from 2008 to 2009, we saw great demand for what? For companies that sold products. Family Dollar was hitting it out of the ballpark. Dollar General was doing really well. Dollar Tree, a lot of people were simply going there to buy products which were considered to be inferior goods, right? It's not a qualitative judgment, it just simply is what it is. Now, by the way, when the economy picked back up, the demand for those goods fell and turned around and went the opposite direction. So inferior goods, it's important to note, it's not really so much qualitative judgment, but it sort of is what it is. And one important thing to know is that these are always substitutes for for some other good in question. Okay, and it's not always just generics, but it is a substitute for other goods. Okay, so questions about that? All right. Well, I want to do so. That was the old business from last time, and what I want to do is I wish I had more board space here. I'm going to try to zoom in for the home gamers, right? So I was watching this from home. So. And the camera angle is not the best, but it sort of is. This is not exactly a Steven Spielberg production here, so we could do what we can with a fixed camera. So I want to get a little bit into the chapter 1 appendix. Oh, okay, so is that right? Okay, and I want to talk a little bit about the chapter 1 appendix, and I don't want to particularly if you're really strong at math. I know some people. I've had people get up and leave and say, "When are you going to be done with this?" And I'll come back. I'm being real strong math students. So I don't want to belabor it, but I also want to sort of talk about where we are, because I know that a lot of econ textbooks intro econ textbooks, we'll have like a special section dedicated to a sort of a math refresher, math jumpstart, whatever you want to call it. And if for no other reason, from my perspective, it serves to sort of give you an idea of what we're looking at in terms of the math expectations, but probably more importantly, talk about what's not going to be there, because I know sometimes people have the idea that we're going to be getting into lots and lots of exotic math, and that's not the case. But there is math involved, and unfortunately, it does come up. So anyway, I'll try to limit myself maybe to a good 10 minutes, and that's about it. So, all right, what is this thing here? We've seen this since what, 6th grade or whenever? When did we first get introduced to the Cartesian system here? When was it?
July.
July. Oh, okay. Never mind. Okay, so we have the Cartesian coordinates two-dimensional model that basically labels one set of variables, the vertical axis, against the one set of variables, the horizontal axis. And we have 4 different quadrants. And within those quadrants, we can have certain observational points that correspond to some XY coordinates. So this is the Y-axis, always is the vertical, and the X-axis is always the horizontal. We know that we've got some sort of observational point, we'll call it X sub A and Y sub A. And well, whatever the data, whatever the value in question is, could change. The data can move, and now we have a new ordered pair. Okay, and this is a way we obviously express ordered pairs, and then we can drag them to their respective coordinates. Okay, this should not be a lot of brand new information to anybody. And furthermore, if this is the origin, that's a key thing to remember. And I say that only because sometimes when we talk about spores, not even here, every time I go over this way, I'm like I've been drinking, so it's kind of sags a little bit. So, but a lot of times people are confused about, is something going up or is it going down? Is it increasing or decreasing? Well, obviously the X here in the 4th quadrant is a positive X and a negative Y, and here it's a negative X and negative Y, yada, yada. Well, we're not going to work with these axes or these quadrants. It's just going to be positive values against positive values. And so the thing to know about the origin is if a function or a curve or a set of data is moving toward the origin, it's going down, it's decreasing. If it's going to the right, it's increasing. And so what I want to sort of reinforce, and I'll probably say it again and again, is when we talk about data that's moving, rather than say it's going up, and I may say it's going up, and I mean, what I really mean is it's going to the right, because I really would rather have people think of this number line here, just like a number line, and things that are increasing are going to the right, always, and decreasing going to the left. I think that's a really important thing for us to be thinking about. Likewise, if the data has changed, whatever these variables are, okay? So if we go back to, let's just erase this and say, okay, well, we're not going to use quadrants 2 through 4. So that's the good news. We're going to get rid of those 3 because we're not going to use them. If you take other econ courses in the future, maybe you will. And maybe after this course, you'll say, I would rather teach class than take another econ class. But you know, it's entirely, you may, if you do an MBA, you probably will take more econ at some point. So this is what we're going to see this a lot. A graph like this, where we've got some vertical axis and some horizontal axis. We're plotting one variable against one variable. And so on the y-axis, it is a convention in economics, and it drives mathematicians crazy because we probably should not have done it from the very beginning, but we made a mistake when econ was first developed, where we tend to put things of a dollar figure or a percentage on this axis, but not always, but often. And we tend to put things of a numerical or countable nature on this axis here on the horizontal axis. Okay, and particularly in the basic micro models that we're going to be looking at today, which is all of what chapter 3 is. So, and if you've ever taken an econ course, and we'll take another one at some point down the road, pretty much every intro econ book, the first 3 chapters cover the same material in all kinds of different orders. But it's almost always chapter 3. We'll talk about demand and supply. We're going to get to that today. And then there's a little bit of from chapter 6 we'll talk about. And it won't take very long for us to cover what's going on there. Okay. Now, why do I say that we erred early on when we did this? It's because the fact that things that go on this axis here tend to be considered a dependent variable. Tend to be considered a dependent variable. Okay. And so in other words, a dependent variable is a variable that does what? It depends on the values that are represented by independent variables. Okay. So if we were to take just some random function looks like that, or the graph of a function, just some curve looks like that, and let's say it has, let's just start with the basic quadratic equation, x squared plus bx plus c. We're not going to set it to 0 and anything like that. All I'm simply saying is this: the y value as a dependent variable does what? It doesn't do anything. Where the action is the independent variables, because the independent variable is what? It's subject to control. It's subject to control or management. To control, or I'll go ahead and put management. Okay, it's a control variable. These are things that can be manipulated. This is particularly the case in macro when we talk about gross domestic product, where let's say the government wants to increase GDP because gross domestic product, the total output of goods and services, is not high enough. And so they don't just wave a wand over GDP, they work on the levers that make up the components of GDP. We're going to get to that next week, this whole idea of what that's about. One good way of thinking about it is this, that when we talk about independent variables, think about a football game and the X's are the players on the field. So, and Y is the scoreboard, okay? The scoreboard doesn't do anything. It just simply reflects the activities of the players on the field. So if a player scores a touchdown, right? What happens to the dependent variable, the scoreboard? It goes up by 6 points, right? And it doesn't go in the opposite direction where the scoreboard operator says, oh, we put 6 points on the board. And then we must go score a touchdown. Now we're required to go get that way. We know it doesn't work that way. One thing leads to another. The dependent variable is dependent upon that. Why is it important? It's important, particularly in macro, because there's a lot of values that people think are under the control of policymakers. And when we talk about macroeconomics, almost always, whenever we use the word policy, we're almost always talking about government policy. Because there's really no independent actor in the economy who can, make a change for the entire economy. There's no super private individual who's got the power to make things happen when it comes to managing the performance of the macroeconomy. Okay? All right, so this is an example of y expressed as x. And in other words, what this is really saying, if we sort of back out a little bit, we're simply saying that y is a function of x. And I apologize if this is maybe a little bit too generic, but I want to make sure that we are all on the same page as we go forward, because particularly next week we start talking about some of the actual variables, and they have a functional relationship. A functional relationship basically is the idea that if we were to graph this, and I don't know what this particular function might look like, maybe it looks something like that. I don't know. Okay, now there's probably going to be a negative term in here somewhere because there's a negative slope, but let's not get that far into this. Okay, so we've got some y expressed as a function of x. And if we graph that particular function, let's say this is what it looks like in graph form. And one good explanation of what a functional relationship is the idea of one unique one unique y goes to one unique x. For every value of x, there's got to be a unique and different value of y, which is why if you have a vertical expression like that, that fails what's called the vertical line test. Why? Because you've got only one x but an infinite number of y's. And so that is not a function. It's not a functional relationship. You can express it mathematically as x equals 2 or whatever, right? But there's no y because y is infinite, so it's not a functional relationship. On the other hand, we've got a unique value of x for every unique value of y. And I know that my daughter had a pretty good textbook. I know when I had trouble when I was younger about functions. And I think it was because the way math used to be taught, which was badly, I think, personally. It probably still is. I don't know. I don't teach math and whatnot, but I just remember when it came to functions that it was just explained to us like there's this little magic box where you throw x's in and out come y's. And it's like, what? And there's something going on inside this magic function machine that's putting a y together. And I thought, well, that doesn't, what? I still don't even get, I still think it's stupid even to this day, right? But my daughter had a good text that said, okay, think about y as a function of x as being the high school prom. One unique girl goes with one unique boy, and that they're one unique pair. Every ordered pair that you can determine, they're one unique value, one unique girl with one unique boy. Not 2 girls, 1 boy, three boys, 1 girl. It's not that. It's one unique value. And I know that today, I don't want to get into the politics of, 2 girls can, I get that. I don't want to belabor the example by getting off into modern day gender relationships. I'm just simply saying, let's take the case for what it's trying to express: mathematical relationships between X and Y. So that's really, but I thought it was good, because that to me sort of expressed this. They've got to be uniquely related to one another in order to be a function. Now, when we talk about functions and what it means in economics, we're talking about this idea of expressing something that is operating on something else to create some result. And so let's say that the value in question, and since we're going to be talking about the demand and supply chapter here, let's say that it's important that we try to raise wages, right? So we would like wages as a macroeconomic variable to go up. Okay, well, we don't just say, okay, wages go up, right? What might we want to do in order to raise wages? What might be the control variable that we might want to try to manage, right?
Raise prices or labor.
Maybe hiring, maybe, right? Or number of jobs, right? Maybe the number of jobs, right? Something like that. Maybe that the government might engage in jobs programs in order to raise wages. And so the more people working means more wages, right? So that would be the value that they could control. So again, wages as a dollar figure is simply a scoreboard figure, but jobs and hiring, making jobs available, job retraining, all that might be a subject to under some control, to the extent that any of these variables are under control and by government. And we're going to talk toward the very end of the term about sort of macro theory, and there are some theorists who are skeptical, I guess is the word, for the fact that government can just simply do things and make economic effects happen. There are those who are skeptical of the role of government. And we'll talk about their views, we'll talk about other views as well. And it's not my job to indoctrinate anybody on theory, but just rather to explain and to introduce and let you make your own determinations as to whether or not there's a good thing to take out of this, a good thing to take out of the other side, etc. Okay, so that's a functional sort of relationship. One final thing, this will be the last thing before we move on and start to talk about chapter 3, and that is this. Let's say we take an ordered pair here, right? And we want to know, is it rising, is it falling, and whatnot. So in other words, the slope of a curve at a given point is simply defined as the slope of that line that's tangent to it. Now, if we were taking a calculus class, it would be a fairly simple calculus equation. But there's no calculus involved here. And so in other words, what is the slope of a line, any line, right? And let's say it's the slope of this line. Well, first of all, what's the equation of a line? Just a generic equation going back to the earliest time you saw a linear equation. It looks something like that, right? It's a functional relationship. One y, one unique y to every unique x. And as x changes, y changes, etc. The b is if intercept of the vertical axis. If it crosses at all, if it doesn't, it's just 0. And then this guy is what I really want to talk about, is what's that? What is that? It's the slope. That's the slope. So what is the slope? Rise over run. So we're going to talk lots and lots about the idea of slopes of functions, because it means something. Because it means is one. If it's a positive slope, it means in this case it is positively sloped. It's upward sloping. So if it's upward sloping, we mean that we have a functional relationship that we would call direct or positive, right? So if we talk about this, if it has a positive slope, in other words, the rise over the run is some value that is some positive value, right? Then we say there's a direct relationship between x and y. A direct, or if you like, if you'd rather go with the term positive, a direct or positive relationship between x and y. And what that simply means is this: if x goes up, y goes down. I'm sorry, if x goes up, y also goes up. If x goes down, y also goes down. Okay, and this is why it's also upward sloping. You can obviously play along with that. So a direct or positive relationship between x and y with positive slope. If it's a negative slope, and gosh, I wish I had more board space here, but I know I'm sort of conscious of the camera and all that. But if we have a negative slope, it's the same rise over run, but we end up with some negative value, right? And we say in that case that we have an inverse or negative relationship between x and y. Okay? And this is about as far as I think we're really going to go with this piece of it here. There's no calculus involved. If we were using calculus, we would take the first derivative of that particular value of x. For those of you who've had calculus, and so if you have, you'll know what that is. If you haven't, don't worry about it because we're not going there. The only reason I bring that up is because some students have had calculus and think, why don't we just take the derivative? Well, it's not calculus is not a requirement for any of the econ courses at CNM, and so that's the reason why. That's just to let you know I'm not like ignoring an entire way of getting to the same answer. I'm just simply saying we're not requiring here. Inverse relationship, meaning what? If x goes up, y goes down. And if x goes down, y goes up. And so that's an important thing to know about. By the way, we're going to be using these relationships as we get into talking about demand and supply and over and over and over again. And by the way, within the same function, whatever this relationship is, for this particular, now this will be the equation for this line, for this, the blue line here. But the red curve itself is probably going to have, some exponents and whatnot. And by the way, the slope here is going to be different than the slope here. The slope here is going to be negative. Slope here is positive, slope here is negative. It depends on where along this particular curve we're talking about it. So, so these are some of the relationships we're going to be getting into. This is really sort of the outer limit, I think, of what we're doing in as far as the math piece goes. The only other thing I'll say here is this, and that when we talk about rise over run, what are we really getting at in terms of, well, how do we solve for rise over run? Well, rise over run is simply this. It's the change in the y value divided by the change in the x value. And so everywhere in any academic setting in which the delta symbol is used, the little triangle, it means the difference between. And I know that if you go to take finance and a lot of other econ courses, the Greek letters, the Greek symbols never quit coming. And it's just because we're sort of out of variables here. And so we kind of move on to the Greeks. But this is a very simple one. It simply means this. It simply means new minus old. So the new one, which is x2, I guess we're in the y's here. So it's y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. In other words, it's new minus old. New minus old. Divided by new minus old. And then we end up with some value, whether it's positive or negative. And that tells us whether or not that straight line, it's a straight line that we're talking about, is upward sloping or downward sloping, and what the relationships are between those two variables. And so if we go back to these here, for normal goods, if the independent variable is demand for generics, okay, and incomes are rising, then probably people are going to demand fewer generics. And so it's probably an inverse relationship between demand for generics and overall income. And it's not just guesswork, these are things that Ben White.
I'm sure. Yes. Yes.
Don't do a Ben White. I think that was one of the first things I said last year. So in other words, we can track this. It's not guesswork. A lot of these ideas may start as guesswork, but obviously econ is a very data-driven sort of discipline. So these things are measurable, and it's the extent to how responsive those are that's really important. To make this sort of bring this back home again. So think about this. Let's say during the pandemic, where there were lots of layoffs and people were having their hours cut, and the unemployment rate went up to, I think it went as high as 15% for a very brief time in the spring of 2020. Okay, so the government wanted to do what? They wanted to maintain spending throughout the economy. Spending throughout the economy. So they want to maintain spending. So spending is the value of interest. But how did the government choose to do that? They wanted people to keep spending, but that was tough because why? Because people's wages were falling, people were losing jobs, etc. So
in some places there wasn't places to spend.
That's true too. In fact, for those who didn't get laid off, we saw their savings go up. There was nothing to spend money on, right? Except things like Pelotons and furniture and whatnot, all that stuff, right? So what did the government? So they want to keep spending going. So what did the government do? And PPP was one program that was more employer directed. But what else to all of us? Stimulus money, so we would go do what with it? Or put in savings. Now, well, a lot of people did. A lot of people did. In fact, I think as we get further, as we put a little distance between us and get a little better data on that whole set of programs, it wasn't just one check, it was a series of checks that it probably is going to need to be targeted a little bit better toward those who are probably unemployed and need it. I mean, like there are a lot of people who got stimulus checks who didn't really quote unquote need it, right? So,
Would you say that student relief, the reason we're fighting with here is because of the COVID, or was that their plan?
I think he campaigned on that. Did he campaign on that? I think he's making good on that. But where is that? Because didn't the judge put brakes on it?
Yeah.
Now, is that still in effect, or is he going forward with that? So,
Still,
well, they keep talking about it like it's a real thing, but last I heard a judge said, let's wait or whatever. I don't know.
I think that's what was talked about today was. That's what he was gonna.
Student loans. Okay. Well, I wasn't invited. It was an invitation.
Oh, yeah. I was like, shoot, I must have passed the email.
Yeah.
Like, right, please.
But they say you can watch the Zoom session. It's like, no, that's all right. I'll catch it on the news later. So, yeah, but I think that was a campaign promise.
same with PPP, there were lots of businesses that
Didn't need it either, right? And probably would not have been eligible had it been. So I think there probably were.
So there was some eligibility.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Sure. Right. There were some, and no doubt there were a lot of households that really benefited from getting a stimulus check, but they expanded because they wanted to do what? They wanted to try to support spending throughout the economy. And it's based upon their presumption that people are going to get a check and they're going to spend it, right? Based upon ordinary human behavior. Some people did and some people didn't. By the way, when we talk about stimulus checks during the Bush administration, the George W. Bush administration, they did the same thing with stimulus checks. And the very last one, it was around 2008, I think it was his last year in office. The idea was that, okay, the economy was slowing down, we had this financial crisis, we had banks failing, yada, yada, we were spending up, so they gave people, it was basically money from the sky, just like this money was last set of go-around. You didn't repay it, didn't have to claim their taxes, you don't file taxes, you gotta go in and figure out a way to get it to you. But it was just money from heaven, basically. And the thinking was, okay, people are going to spend it. Instead, that last go around in 2008, the public pulled a fast one on the government and did what with it? They saved, the savings rate went up, so it did not have the desired impact. And the reason why was because now, looking back in hindsight, people were kind of afraid. Banks are failing. What? Who thought banks could fail? These big banks like First Union, Wachovia, and Washington Mutual, they're not supposed to fail, right? In fact, bankers go to great lengths to make sure that people think they're strong and safe, right? Big vaults and granite, buildings and all that. Well, not so much the case. And so people pulled a fast one, they started to save, and so that did not really work as planned. But that sort of laid the template for what the Biden administration did. Well, actually, it started. I think the stimulus check started under Donald Trump, didn't it? Right? I think so. And continue on with Joe Biden. So there was a template for how this goes forward. And I think that we probably will learn as we go forward that maybe things could have been done differently with some of the stimulus checks. And maybe in some cases with unemployment benefits, because I say that as not a person who was unemployed, but hearing from a lot of students saying, hey, I know somebody who's been unemployed for a year and they're still getting unemployment checks. And they've got no desire to look for a job whatsoever, none whatsoever. And they're, now it's not everybody can live on unemployment benefits. I imagine one or two people can, right? And and as a result, so I think and I heard this from a lot of people saying that there were a lot of people that were quote unquote abusing it. And I know it's always it sounds terribly insensitive to say that people who are unemployed are abusing the system. It makes it sound like we're beating up on the unfortunate. But there is, I guess, some anecdotal evidence, if not something more substantive, that said that maybe that was happening. So you kind of get the idea that all these programs are targeted in ways in which maybe others would have them be, but that is the world of economics, and it's always controversial. I think I mentioned last time that it's always controversial, and and sometimes we get, like I have a class called Survey of Economics, and we got to do a discussion about Karl Marx. We have people getting really upset in the class, and it's like, don't attack me. I'm just talking about what Marx's theories were, right? And of course, Marx had the idea that the workers were going to all sort of rise up and overthrow their bosses and start being, start running factories. And of course, that didn't happen, but he kind of had the idea that it would happen. So anyway, and that is obviously a problematic idea in the minds of many. Okay. All right. So questions about anything on that math piece, that chapter 1 appendix? Again, as I think I mentioned last time, that in the early stages here, we sort of are weaving in and out of chapters 1 and 2, and so it won't always be obvious what it is that we're really always what chapter we're drawing from, but it will be now going forward. I think the McConnell book is not really. I'm sure I don't really understand how it works. So, so the McConnell book is a pretty good one. It's a pretty good text, and we've been using it for some time. And everybody was able to figure out how to get to it, right? And so, did they post a link in the site yet? Because it's supposed to copy itself over, but it didn't do it. So maybe, well, does anybody not know how to get there yet to the book? You go to Brightway. I think you have to go to Brightway, right?
Yeah. I was gonna ask if there's like a link at Brightspace somewhere that I didn't.
Well, there's supposed to. Well, there's supposed to be one. And by the way, I've got another 7-week class that just started last week also, and it's one of those independent study classes. The students said, "How do I get to it?" Because we linked them over to another site, not a textbook site, just another work site, and she couldn't figure out how to do it. And I got with the aforementioned Ben White. He's our guru on everything like that. And so apparently this stuff is not, what I'm saying is it's not all copying automatically. And sometimes I can't always see what your view is. My view is a little bit different. So, but if you want a link and you want to like, let me see if I can do that for you. Okay. All right. Well, chapter 3 is really the last chapter that sort of can be tracking along micro and macro tracks. I think I mentioned last week that I know that sometimes when we teach in the full term class, where it's only an hour and 15 minutes and whatnot, for about the first couple of weeks, I've had students who are both enrolled in macro and micro both, and it's the very same content. And they say, are these classes really different? And yes, they are, because after chapter 3, they kind of split off. And as we leave chapter 3, and we're going to skip chapters 4 and 5 in the book, because they're really more micro pieces. We're not going to really get into that. Instead, it's going to be chapter 6 is introduction to econ. It's a weird chapter, I think. And I'm not being critical of the book. I'm just saying it's sort of strange because it starts out talking about business cycles, which I'm going to get into here, and then it sort of stops and spends page on page on page about things like sticky prices and sticky wages. If you don't know what those are, don't worry about it. What it really means is sometimes things get gummed up, get jammed up, and they don't move very flexibly and whatnot. I think it's a strange place to talk about it personally, but which is why I'm not going to get into that part of chapter 6. About the biggest takeaway from that, which is a very brief chapter anyway, is this idea of business cycles and what they're all about. Because a lot of what macro econ is about the ups and downs of the business cycle and what to do about them and how we know where we are at any particular time. Okay, so before we do that though, this chapter that tracks along with demand and supply is really more of a micro chapter. And that is talking about the two sides of markets, demand side and supply side. And for whatever reason, a lot of economists like to start this with the demand side of the economy. Well, let's give a definition. This is a little bit more concrete definition than what I think a lot of us view as demand, because the term demand and supply is one that I'm sure that we've all used for our entire lives. And in fact, whatever the good in question is, if you're wondering about the price, then you are probably instinctively thinking about what are the supply and demand issues that are going on behind it. So remember during the pandemic, and there was, as we were kind of coming out of it, what was happening with the used car market, right? Everybody remember what was going on with used cars? Skyrocketing in price, used cars, to the point where car dealers were calling people after they had sold them a new car saying, do you want to sell it back to us? In some cases, I think they were paying them more than what they bought for the car in the first place, which is practically unheard of. It's a function of demand and supply, of limited supply, and interest rates were still fairly low, so demand was being supported at the same time. So we sort of know these dynamics. And if we wonder why the price of Super Bowl tickets is way up here, it's because of supply and demand, limited supply and lots of demand, right? And I've always wondered why they don't play Super Bowls in stadiums that could hold twice as many people, right? They probably could fill every seat. I don't know if you could see very well, but I think people would just pay just for the event, right? To be there, but you get the idea. By the way, there's a believe it or not, there's an entire body of academic literature on ticket scalping and the economics of ticket scalping. People make a living, and sometimes a pretty good living, by being professional ticket scalpers. And I don't know what the answer is. Is it legal in Albuquerque to scalp tickets for like Isotopes games and Lobos games? Does anybody know the answer to that? I know in some places it's definitely not legal. In some places it definitely is legal. And I went to high school and college with a guy who actually made a living scalping tickets and did very well. And then they passed a rule, and that it was a college town where nobody could scalp tickets. So he took his operation behind closed doors. It was like a mafia don, right, selling tickets on the down low, but because they outlawed it. So, and I think Phoenix has the law, but the reason why are people willing to pay for a $15 ticket? Why are they willing to pay $75? Why would they do that? Or going to StubHub or any of these places? Why would you do that? Because it's worth it to you, and there's a limited supply, and so as a result, you're willing to pay the price. Particularly things like auction sites and whatnot, are functions of demand and supply. And I think if you understand demand and supply dynamics, I think it helps you be a better consumer. Even though, as I mentioned last time, our negotiating muscles are not really that much in flex in our society. We don't really negotiate for too many goods, which I would argue is probably a weakness, our economic weakness in that regard, which is why I like these sites like Priceline and Expedia and all that. And I kind of like to play sites against each other a little bit and whatnot. So anyway, let's talk about demand. What's the definition? The ability, willingness of potential buyers to purchase goods at various prices and quantities. So two things here: ability and willingness. They've got to go together. Okay, otherwise it's not demand. We need to be clear that we're talking about those who are actually on the demand side of a market. And here we're talking about the market for a good or service, not demand for all goods, but demand for a very specific good, name the good in question, shoes or whatever. Cigarettes, okay, who is on the demand side for cigarettes? If you're a non-smoker, do you care at all what the price of cigarettes is? Absolutely not, because you're not on the demand side. So if it's $50 a pack, you could care less, right? By the way, what do cigarettes even cost? I don't even know, because I don't smoke. So was it $10 a pack, or was it $7? Nobody smokes. Well, nobody smokes anymore. That's why. So, right. So people used to smoke a lot more, but that's a good thing. So so if you're not on the demand side for cigarettes, it makes no difference to you, right? Now you may have the ability. I can go buy cigarettes, but I don't have the willingness, so it makes no difference. In other words, I'm not on the demand side for that good. Likewise, let's say a good like a luxury good, like a luxury car, like a Ferrari, right? Like a Ferrari. If you're trying to target would-be buyers, remember potential buyers, right? Would you put an ad in the Daily Lobo for somebody to buy a Ferrari, right? Would that be a good market? College students probably, but probably not, right? So it'd be a waste of money. But where might you advertise, right? For if they even advertise at all, I have no idea whether a Ferrari advertise.
The magazine,
I'm not sure they
in the
need.
first class.
Yeah, Forbes. What?
The magazine in the first class cabin.
In the first class, right? Only the first class, right? Only the first class, right? So Forbes or one of those upper end magazines like that. That's where you're going to attract potential buyers who have the ability, because a lot of people would maybe have the willingness, right? And even so, there are goods people have the ability but no willingness, like Elon Musk's or Jeff Bezos's company, where they put you in space if you pay whatever the amount is, right? I imagine there are probably a lot of people who have the ability to do that, but not a lot of willingness to get shot into space, right? And I forget who it was that was being interviewed, some billionaire. They were saying, "Are you going to take a ride on Jeff Bezos's rocket?" And he goes, "Why on earth would I want to risk my life going to space? To do what? 20 minutes floating around. Oh, okay, I'm in space. Great. And I may not come back, right? So what's the point of being rich if you're going to get lost in space, right? So you kind of get the idea. It's got to be ability and willingness. They've got to go together at various prices and quantities. Again, potential buyers can be drawn in. By the way, you can be a potential buyer but don't like the particular price, but you're still on the demand side, right? So maybe you would buy a Lobos ticket, right? But maybe you don't like the particular price. And so if the price comes down, maybe you get priced in. And it may not have anything to do with your ability. It may just simply be your willingness. For me to go to Lobos, well, I'm gonna have to come down a little bit before I go pay for a Lobos game, right? You get the idea, right? The Lobos, Lobos started going undefeated. It's like, oh, hey, the Lobos, whoa, okay, live with, right? I'm willing to pay up, right? So this is the way people are, right? That your willingness can change depending on what we're talking about here, right? So the good itself can change. So ability and willingness have got to go together. Now, we have very few laws in economics, and there are only really two that I can think of: the law of demand and the law of supply. And even though micro's got some weird ones like law of diminishing returns, let's not worry about that. The law of demand is pretty basic, and that is the price and quantity, which we're going to be plotting on a graph here, are inversely related. That is, as one thing goes up, the other thing goes down. And let's talk about that, what that looks like. So I just gave you a bit of an introduction to the Cartesian system that we use as a basis for graphing markets within econ. And then later we'll sort of take the individual market, we'll sort of blow it up to represent the entire economy. So when we talk about demand and supply, let's talk about demand first. So we tend to plot things of a price nature on the vertical axis, right? And things of a quantitative nature in terms of quantity on this axis. Okay, so and this is simply known as the basic market model, right? And for those of you that are reading ahead, chapter 3, or maybe you may have even seen this in your high school econ course, right? As bad as my high school econ course was, I think we did at least get into price and quantity and demand and supply, even though it wasn't much of an econ course that I took in high school. I don't know about your experience. This is called a basic market model, and sometimes it's simply called a PQ plane, right? Sometimes called a PQ plane. And so what does the demand curve look like? Okay, the demand curve tends to be simply downward sloping. And I know a lot of textbooks will have it as a straight line. In reality, it tends to be a little bit more curvilinear. And it really represents the idea that price and quantity are inversely related. And that is, if the price of a good, for whatever reason, we don't care how the price got here, but the price of something is $12, and then people will demand some quantity, and let's say they demand 24 units of that particular good. The price would come down for whatever reason. We don't care what the reason was. So P1 will move from P1 to P2, and now the price is $8. And as a result, quantity now goes from Q1 to Q2. Now people demand 36 units of that good, meaning that as the price comes down, the quantity demanded goes up. So inverse relationship. And this is among the easiest things I think to understand. And that is, as the price falls, we walk down this direction toward consuming more goods. And it works in the other direction as well. If the price were to go from if we reverse P1 and P2 and Q1 and Q2, the price went up to 12, we would expect the quantity demanded to fall to 24. Now, where does this come from? Where do we get these numbers? I got to keep remembering that I've got a YouTube video here. Sorry, YouTubers, that you're missing this. So where does this come from? And I know that I think there's a tendency, and I think I probably was guilty of this at one time as a student. That was the idea. How do you know what the demand curve looks like? This to me sounds a little bit like just economists, econ professors just going to the board and saying what they think a demand curve ought to look like because it's logical. And then I'll grant you it is logical, but how do we really know? In other words, is it scientifically arrived at? And the answer is more than what might meet the eye, okay? And it's like this, and that is through all kinds of data and research. And it's probably easier to do with bigger business than it is with smaller business, obviously. But through observational data, through surveys, through things like coupons and experiments with price. By the way, a lot of the reason why firms will do things like sales and coupons and rebates is to simply see what the demand curve looks like. So they can kind of get an idea of what it looks like, or manipulate the price to see what happens to the quantity. And so as a result, by using statistical techniques like a least squares technique, you can arrive at a demand curve through statistical analysis to the extent that it's possible. So this is a lot of what economists in the real world do, particularly microeconomists, is to try to determine what is going on with the demand function, right? Particularly as it relates to price, and particularly as it relates to this relationship between price and quantity. And that is, if we can get away with charging a higher price, we'll do so. Particularly if we can charge a higher price and nothing really happens with the quantity demanded, right? And it's almost a gospel truth that if, in fact, the demand side of the market that you're serving as a supplier is pretty insensitive to price, that is, they don't really fall back if you raise the price, then you should probably keep doing what? Well, I say keep doing, I'm kind of leading into water and what the answer is, right? If it's insensitive, then you should do what as an article of faith, right? Keep raising the price, keep raising the price, keep raising the price. And you do that because the demand side tends not to be sensitive to the particular price. Now, there are goods, frankly, that are very sensitive, which the demand side is very sensitive to change in price. But there are a lot of products in which people are not particularly sensitive. And I just saw a couple of stories in some of the financial press lately about the fast food makers, and fast food prices are going up pretty dramatically. And people seem to be rather insensitive to that, right? It used to be you could go to McDonald's and in and out $5, right? No, forget it, right? You might get a Coke or whatever. I mean, you're not done at $5, right? So people are pretty insensitive to that. And so at what point then do people stop paying $10 per person to go to McDonald's? I don't know. And I guess we're going to find out because they're going to continue to raise the price because the demand side seems to be insensitive to that particular price manipulation. If they find that people start to back off and don't buy as much, you can expect the prices to fall. By the way, real estate prices were just skyrocketing in some places. We saw stories before the interest rates started to go up where people were paying greater than asking price. This is not the first time where we've seen somebody list a house for, I don't know, 350,000 and then ends up selling for 400,000 or whatever. We've seen periods of time where that has happened, right? But it usually is a sign that that market is toward the top and that things are going to reverse. And now what are we seeing? Falling house prices, falling house prices. So
I was going to ask you about that. Why a market does that? Because it was for a while. My wife and I were a year and a half ago looking and just kept seeing, we thought it was ridiculous at $200 a square foot.
yeah,
And I got to 220 and we thought, man, this is ridiculous. There were places we saw it was $350 a square foot and they were selling like that.
and they probably weren't. I mean, and you guys, we went back 10 years prior, it would have gone for a lot less than
Oh,
20 years
yeah,
prior.
I mean, in 2010, that would have been $150 a square foot.
Right. And the price of real estate does at times get crazy, particularly in urban areas. And it makes you kind of wonder why anybody wants to buy a house at all, I mean, frankly. My brother bought a house in just north of San Francisco years and years and years ago. He paid like $200,000 for it. Today, it's worth like $2 million. And he goes, I did nothing to my house at all. And it's the happiest home in the neighborhood, and it's worth $2 million. He goes, I didn't do anything at all, and it just crazy home prices. Now it's probably come down a bit, and whatnot. I think his wife wants to sell the house. I think take the money, but you get the idea. Real estate does that kind of thing.
They're coming down. There's
Dead
still a lot of places that are 250.
Yeah,
But I'm starting to see, because I'm still watching where we decided to renovate.
Yeah.
But,
Well, do you think it will go down?
yes, I
Like
do.
talking to realtors
Yes.
and stuff, they say this is the new, it's not gonna go down. This is the new-
We'll see.
I know,
It
I'm
has
like,
come down.
I'd be silly to, even my house alone, I bought it at 135 and right now it's valued at like 235.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I would not, I don't know how people are able to even buy that.
Well, the problem with selling your house. Yeah.
Where are you gonna go?
Where were we gonna
Yeah.
go?
Where that new one,
Like
that's
Aldi's.
right. That's exactly right. Now we're gonna go.
That's what I was thinking, I'm like,
No,
Mom,
we're
I'll
gonna
wait it out.
I'm
making dinner and wait it out.
She lives across the street from me, so like, it's perfect. I,
Unless you want to live in your car. Or whatever.
Yeah.
And, by the way, I saw an advertisement today where Ford is coming out with a van you can live in. Not an RV, a van they're supposed to live in. It's like very roomy. It's kind of, I mean, it's a little bit bigger than a minivan, but it's still a van.
We see people, I mean, we walk in the morning and there's a person.
People living in their.
Park to park, and we see them, if we walk all over our neighborhood, and we see that van parked at various parks. And
Yeah.
obviously somebody.
People living, yeah.
It's it's like one of the prime vans, but it's all overland, right?
It would have to be very nice for me to live in. a
Yeah.
van. I think it'd be cold in the winter time. What do you do?
Running
Run
the
your,
In New
heater all
Mexico,
run your
though.
heater all
In
night?
New Mexico, a lot of blankets.
Well, you might be okay in New Mexico, yeah, but I don't know. I could live in an RV. I could live in an RV. I could do that. I could live in an RV. I think. In a van, I'm pretty sure I could.
I don't know, summer would be trouble.
Summer would be probably worse than winter. I would think, in New Mexico.
Can't kick on a generator at a park and annoy
Yeah. It was one of we perfect. Be afraid somebody would like break into my van.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so, but anyway, yeah, home price, I think they are gonna go. I mean, we're already starting to see it happen. Interesting too, because we tend to think that housing is real estate, anything real estate related is just getting smacked around. But one thing that I know we saw during the early 90s and even during the 2001, 2002 recession was that remodeling tended to be fairly popular. And so like Home Depot did very well. So people who didn't want to buy a home would rather stay where they put.
Those are some of the places that did very well at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Because that's something you could do. Right? That's something you can do on the weekend.
Yeah, right. And a lot of people were learning how to do stuff, learning how to add a room and learning how to get permits and all that. And there's like in the whole universe of YouTube channels that can show you how to build a house and all that. So it makes me want to build a house. I don't know that I can get anybody to help me. I'm going to need somebody to help me. I think. I don't think I can lift lumber, drywall. It's you get the idea. So anyway, so that's demand. And one thing, we'll take a break here, but one thing I think we're a little bit late to come on break anyway. But I think we should know here is this: that if something happens with the price, you're sliding down along the demand axis or the demand curve here. Okay, and the thing to know about is what I've got on the slide. Movements along the demand curve are due to changes in price, and only changes in price. So think about this: if we've got a demand function that we've analyzed, we've assessed, we've estimated what it looks like, it's basically one that you want to take a picture of, because it's going to change. Okay, but while it looks the way it looks, if the price changes, the quantity demanded will change, and a lot of what we see happening, a lot of what look like good deals or whatever that sellers will offer us are really attempts to sort of find out what this demand curve looks like, how sensitive demand is to changes in price. It's a lot of why sellers will offer promotional items or 2-for-1s or things like that, so they understand the sensitivity of demand, of quantity demanded to a change in price. But it would really take a picture. Now, these things can move back and forth, the data can change, and that's really the next topic. So why don't we take a break, and when we come back, we will finish up demand and we'll get into supply. So let's take a break, and maybe the traffic's all gone out there, I don't know. So is the president staying overnight or what?
No, he's gone. He was leaving. That's why I got.
Okay.
He was on his way.
For the break, with regard to demand and whatnot, I think it's relatively straightforward, or anything regarding the appendix or anything like that. Okay, well, one thing I wanted to talk about here, and I guess I'm having trouble sort of swiveling back and forth between the board and the, I want to make sure everyone is able, oh, I guess I do have it on the graph, is this idea of demand curve as something you just take a picture of and say, okay, it's locked into place. But this is what demand looks like right now. But one thing that we do know, and then we can, for any particular price, kind of the idea of one unique Y and one unique X. So this is one unique price goes to one unique quantity. But what if economists start to look at this and determine that now the data is moving this direction? So now it's a new demand curve. In other words, whatever the demand function is now changing. And so now we have a new demand function. So now instead of having what we would call D1, now we say it's D2. In other words, there's a change, there's a shift happening. Okay, so a change in demand basically means something within the equation of demand is changing. And without getting into what the equation of demand looks like, we're simply saying there are factors that cause it to change, and it's not the price of the good. Okay. And what it means with a rightward shift is this: a rightward shift always, which is why I sort of preach this idea of right, left versus up, down, that a rightward shift is an increase in overall demand. Increase in overall demand, not quantity demand, but overall demand. Okay. And it's due to a change in a non-price variable. And those known as the determinants of demand, which you can sort of think of as sort of the DNA of demand. Whatever the secret sauce is that goes into the demand function is now changing. And so now there's more quantity demanded at every price. And that's really the takeaway, more quantity demanded. And we're going to sort of modify the Q value with a little subscript D, okay, to say that every price is going to be more quantity demanded. So for the same price, we'll call P bar. We were at Q1, now we're demanding Q2 because demand is increasing. In other words, the whole function is shifting. And if we do all these various kinds of things that we call non-price variables, or the determinants of demand. So nowhere here is the price of the good responsible for. And I know that a lot of times people will say, well, the price of the good is what's causing demand to increase. Well, it might cause quantity demand to increase, but not causing demand itself to increase. And so let me, oh shoot, I think I just turned the camera off. Oh no. What did I just do here? I've got a blue screen on the Zoom function. Hold on, hold on. Let me